This is cover 3, or at least a version of it. I know that it doesn't look exactly like how you picture a classic cover 3 in your mind, but believe me, it is. Just ask Nick Saban, one of the greatest defensive coaches of all time, who calls this 3-buzz Mabel for reference. Now, what if I told you that another group of all-time great defensive coaches also consider this to be cover 3? Or, once again, at least a version of it. And no, your eyes do not fool you. What I have drawn on the board here is a textbook example of a coverage known as the Tampa-2.
When they do play zone, they play what's called Tampa-2 defense.
Tampa-2 defense.
Tampa-2.
Known as the Tampa-2.
That you play zone coverage, you have a lot of fast guys, you have maximum effort and energy, you don't do a lot of things, you get a lot of people to the ball, all of those precepts, that's the essence of Tampa-2.
The Tampa-2 is one of the most famous coverages of all time, really, and for obvious reasons. And believe it or not, there are some really heavy hitters among NFL coaches that don't actually believe the Tampa-2 is even part of the cover 2 family. And in fact, they more treat it like it's an inverted cover 3 that should only be used in very specific circumstances. Or I guess technically cover 3 would be an inverted Tampa-2. What came first, the chicken or the 2002 Buccaneers? Oh, and one quick note for the 3 people that I think are probably typing rage-filled comments right now about the differences between 2 high and 1 high coverages. Yeah, the famous defensive coaches that I referred to that do consider the Tampa-2 and cover 3 to be basically the same thing with minor differences, and that they're just 2 sides of the same coin depending on down and distance. Yeah, it's Monty Kiffin, the patron saint of the Tampa-2 in the first place. And also all of his most famous proteges, who you probably definitely recognize. What you're looking at right now is all 22 of Monty Kiffin's Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense from 2003. And as far as I know, this has never actually been seen publicly before. All of these snaps that you're watching with prime Warren Sapp, Derrick Brooks, Simeon Rice, Rondé Barber, and John Lynch, all of them are on early down situations, 1st and 10 primarily. And for those of you who've played at least a little bit of Madden and you're familiar with coverages, the theme should actually be very apparent here. Tampa is not actually in the Tampa-2 in any of these. In fact, after charting 11 full games of that 2003 Bucs defense, I know for sure that their most common coverage call was not actually the Tampa-2. It was that cover 3. 2 deep safety zone looks were definitely their most famous coverage, and the one that got all the press in long downs and distances like 3rd and 9, but the spine of that system, the very core of why it worked, was actually built on cover 3. Quick side note with the whiteboard, by the way, and we will get back to the film in just a second. I just think the whiteboard's an easier way to explain this. The reason why the Monty Kiffin coaching tree considers the Tampa-2 and cover 3 to effectively be the exact same 3-deep coverage is because it's effectively the exact same zone distribution, you just have different players in each role. This right next to me is a drawing of a pre-snap rotation into a Nick Saban coverage called cover 3 buzz with a Mabel adjustment, or cover 3 Mabel for short. Mabel means man coverage in Sabanese, and this is usually used against a 3-by-1 look from the offense, which means 3 receiving threats to one side, 1 receiving threat to the other. And you're going to see this in literally every single modern defense in the NFL, and most of them in college too, if they've been even a little bit influenced by Nick Saban, which a lot of them have. You obviously could play this as a straight-up zone coverage, by the way. Actually, that's a lie. You can't. I have a lot of coaches that follow me on this channel, and they would yell at me if I just drew this as a straight-up zone coverage, because nobody just plays country cover 3 anymore. You get absolutely fucking annihilated. So you're not going to have this corner zone off to a true deep third. He's not going to be coming out here to play curl flat. He's not just playing a hook zone and letting this crosser go, because that's a 20-yard gain. This is what they do. They basically just play man to the weak side, and then they flood it to the strong side, and they play true zone here, and they play man backside. So I'm not just going to draw a normal cover 3 because nobody plays normal cover 3. It's fucking stupid to do that now. You get absolutely carved up. So 3-buzz Mabel, that is your new god. Learn it, worship it. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, come along for the next 45 seconds and learn some coaching terminology that you probably will never use. The general structure of 3-Buzz Mabel, I like to call it a 3-ish deep zone coverage, because it could be 3 deep. You know, if this receiver is running deep, the corner's going with him, that makes it 3 deep. But if this Y is also going deep and we're running 4 verts, it's technically 4 deep. It just kind of depends on how the man coverage component of this thing plays out, but we'll get to them in a second. The zone coverage on the front side is still the same as a normal cover 3. This corner is zoning off to a deep third. The nickel is buzzing out to play a curl flat zone underneath him. That's why they call it 3-Buzz, by the way, because he is buzzing to the curl flat zone to protect this corner underneath from any sort of comeback route. He's going to be playing underneath this X receiver and just kind of creating a vertical bracket. Strong safety is going to be stepping down and playing a hook zone. That is his job as the hook defender, is to kind of take care of the low seam area, as well as kind of protecting these two guys from inside cuts from the X receiver or from the slot, kind of working up into that seam. That's his job. Now, free safety, zoning off to the post, but he's leaning more to the passing strength. He's not just playing dead in the middle. He is leaning to the passing strength, and especially kind of keeping an eye on that number 2 receiver as a deep seam threat. Why does he have the confidence to do that? Why is he not playing dead in the middle of the field? Because this Mike linebacker is what's called the 3-up is 3 player. Again, if you don't know what that is, if 3 is up, meaning if this number 3 receiver goes vertical, the Mike is carrying him in man coverage. Why did they do that? They want to protect the safety from getting stretched out and not being able to protect the seam. So if this Y goes vertical on a deep cross, they don't want this safety to have to kind of midpoint 2 guys that are in opposite seams, because you just can't do that. They don't want the safety to get pulled this way only for this slot receiver to go up the deep seam, run right by the strong safety, and all of a sudden he's wide ass open in the seam. They don't want to have that happen. So the safety is going to be really protecting that deep seam area. And if they kind of try to stretch that horizontally with a cross, the Mike is going to carry it. So that's kind of what sets this coverage apart, is you don't get the stress on the free safety. He just has one guy to worry about, or rather one area to worry about. Again, on the backside, the will is matching the running back. This corner is playing man on the Z. He's following him everywhere he goes. So if he goes vertical, he's going vertical. That's why I say it's a 3-ish deep. We can get 3, we can get 4, we can get 2 deep. It's 3-ish. There are a bunch of different nuances to it and different rules that change based on formation and personnel matchups and yada yada yada, but that is the general structure of 3-Buzz Mabel. Now, with the magic of editing and taking a moment to completely redraw this board, this is what a Tampa-2 looks like from the very same pre-snap alignment against the very same offensive formation. Now, the strong safety, who, let's pretend it's John Lynch or Cam Chancellor, it doesn't really matter who, instead of them coming down to play a hook zone responsibility and also being involved in the run fit, now they are expanding out to play a deep half zone. The free safety or the weak safety, depending on whatever you want to call it, they're also expanding out to play a deep half. So both of these safeties are essentially playing the same role as a corner would in cover 3, in that they're protecting against a deep ball down the boundary. And then you have the Mike linebacker, who's basically playing the same role as a post player in a cover 3, in that he's doing what's called running the pole up the middle seam, and his job is to stop anything up that middle seam, especially from that number 3 receiver. Like I said, we'd come back to it, there's a lot of similarities here. Now, when this coverage plays out, you're going to end up, again, with a 3 deep, 4 underneath zone coverage. Boundary, boundary, middle seam, curl, curl, hook, hook. It's literally cover 3. Or I guess technically they're correct in that Tampa-2 is inverted cover 3. Now, you may be asking the question, after seeing all this, okay, why the hell are these coverages called so interchangeably then if they're the same thing? Why is cover 3 called so much on early downs while the Tampa-2 is called mostly on obvious passing downs if their coverage goals are basically the same? Well, the answer probably doesn't surprise you that much, because it doesn't actually have anything to do with coverage at all. So once more, through the magic of editing, let's redraw this board again. That, by the way, is inside zone read against cover 2, and it's pretty much any defensive coordinator's worst nightmare because even normal inside zone is hard enough to stop from cover 2, let alone a zone read, and pretty much every single DC is not going to be caught dead in a position where they have to try to play a zone read from cover 2. But what do I mean by hard to stop? Well, you're even in the box, meaning 6 blockers for 6 defenders in the box. These safeties are not coming to help. Again, they're in cover 2, they're playing deep half zones, they gotta not be in the run fit at all, or else the coverage doesn't work. So you're kind of on your own down here, let alone when the quarterback is also a threat to keep it. Now you're -1 in the run fit, which is never where you want to be. So pretty much the only way to stop the run from cover 2, and especially with mobile quarterbacks, it's even harder to do. But if you're going to try to play cover 2 and stop the run, pretty much the only reliable way to do it is with what's called a run stunt, so that you can do what coaches refer to as stealing back a gap.
So cover 2 is pretty soft versus the run. So to make up for that, we run a stunt with the D-line. We'd stunt the 3 technique would cross the face of the center or the whatever gap, and the D-line would run a pinch or a long stick. And then if they ran that side, Lance would go chase the end, and he would spill, and I would come over the top. So we try to take away one of the gaps that they have in cover 2, because there's only 7 guys to stop the run, and they have 7 guys that can block us, so they have a hat for a hat. Cover 3, you have an extra guy with a safety. You don't need to run the stunt to do it, though. Does that make sense?
Yeah. In cover 3 looks where, for instance, against either 12 personnel or 21 personnel packages on early downs and distances, and you're rolling down that strong safety to get an extra man in the box, now the defense can be what's known as gapped out against the run, meaning they have 1 man for every gap on the line of scrimmage, and everyone is flying downhill to the ball and just playing as fast as possible. The coverage is the same on the back end if it's a passing play, sort of. Like we said, it's still 3 deep, 4 underneath. But the run defense specifically is better because you're gapped out with that extra man in the box. It's just a much safer, more versatile call, especially on early downs when teams run the ball more often. Or at least 20 years ago when they ran the ball more often. Now, cover 3 is not without its own weaknesses, and Lord knows it has a lot of them, and one of the main reasons why coaches in the Monte Kiffin coaching tree transition from calling cover 3 on early downs to calling Tampa-2 on obvious passing downs, even though the zone distribution is relatively the same, again it's 3 deep, 4 underneath, the reason why they switched to Tampa-2 is that the angles and timing with which they get into that zone distribution tend to be a lot more favorable from Tampa-2 against a lot of very popular passing concepts. Allow me to explain. You know how in a quote-unquote normal cover 2 call where the Mike linebacker is hanging really low towards the line of scrimmage and he's mirroring a running back, and how a huge hole develops behind him over the intermediate middle area of the field? That's a major weakness of old school cover 2, and one of the primary reasons why the Tampa-2 was invented in the first place, to plug up that leak by having the Mike linebacker run the pole and get to that area. And as you may have guessed, quote-unquote normal cover 3, or country cover 3 as most coaches refer to it, also has that weakness. Because that middle third defender, the free safety, starts so deep and has to stay so deep so that he can give inside help to the corners, it's very easy to use those receivers outside to just run off the deep 3 zone defenders and leave that same big void over the middle. Again, the corners are playing a very different technique than they would in a cover 2, so the safety has to protect them first, which means the linebackers get hung out to dry if the quarterback has enough time to hit that area. You compare that to how a Tampa-2 look handles that same type of concept, and that weakness mostly disappears. Again, this is still technically a 3 deep look, the outside thirds still have protection against the deep ball down the boundary, but the fact that the safeties are now protecting those deep thirds from inside leverage, rather than the corners doing it from outside leverage like in a cover 3, that means that this Mike linebacker can just handle the intermediate middle threats from the very beginning and not have to worry about anything else going on behind him. And again, because nobody runs the ball on 3rd and 8 anyway unless they want to get fired, there's no real downside to calling this type of coverage in that situation because its main consistent weakness is the run game. The entire cabal of Monte Kiffin disciples around the NFL and in college football all run essentially the same defense, or at least different flavors of the same defense, and they've done so for 20 years because it works. You can go watch Bears games from 2005 and 2006 under Lovie Smith, who coached under Kiffin in Tampa, and it's the same thing. cover 3 on 1st and 10 to stop the run so you can get them into a 2nd and long situation where they're probably going to have to pass. And then you call Tampa-2 to smother them with good coverage and force a mistake or an incompletion or something like that. And then that brings up 3rd and long, where you show blitz just for fun and to try to mix it up a little bit, only to then drop back into Tampa-2 again, force another mistake, and get off the field. I'm not even exaggerating. All of that was one series in order against Buffalo in early 2006, and the entire Bears defense from that mid-2000s era was just that sequence of events over and over and over again. Every single game that I charted looked exactly like that.
Simple. Every play was so simple. We go into defense in the games with 5 defensive calls. 5 calls, that's it. We'd have a cover 2, cover 3, a man blitz, a zone blitz, and then our 3rd down stuff. And that was it.
You can look at Pete Carroll at USC as another example, and keep in mind that Carroll started working under Kiffin in the late 70s at Arkansas, and he frequently says that Kiffin is his biggest inspiration as a coach, and it was the exact same pattern even there. Pete had a bunch of future NFL players on his front 7, including 3 incredible linebackers in Ray Maualuga, Clay Matthews Jr., and Brian Cushing. And he still, even with all that talent, called cover 3 on early downs so he could be gapped out in the run game, and then he still leaned heavily on Tampa-2 calls in obvious passing situations. When Coach Carroll then later got to Seattle, he famously transitioned into being even more cover 3 oriented rather than Tampa-2 oriented on passing downs just because he had the personnel to do so. And to be honest, if I had Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman, I'd probably do the same thing, but he still did have some Tampa-2 elements from time to time simply because he also had Bobby Wagner, who back in his prime could run the pole and carry the seam threats down the middle better than almost anyone else. And finally, lest we forget about Mike Tomlin, one of the greatest coaches in NFL history in his own right, and also a former Kiffin assistant in Tampa, by the way. If you go back and watch the Steelers defense literally just last year in 2022, it's almost the exact same Monty Kiffin pattern, even though Tomlin himself is not even the defensive coordinator. On 1st downs last year, between the 20-yard lines, so not including either red zone area on either side of the field, the Steelers were 2nd in the league in cover 3 calls on those early down situations at 51.7%, which is a lot. But then on 2nd and 8 situations or longer after they get a stuff in the run game by playing cover 3, they drop that cover 3 percentage down to 32%, and they were then 2nd in the NFL in calling cover 2 in those scenarios at 30.5%, which for context, that is a lot of cover 2 relative to the rest of the league by modern standards. The mean number in the NFL for cover 2 calls in those situations last year, ironically, was the Buccaneers at 16.7%. So the Steelers were nearly double that mean number. There have been a lot of incredible defenses to come through the NFL over the last couple of decades, from the early 2000s Bucs to the Bears in the mid-2000s to the beginnings of the Legion of Boom only 5 years later that was built by not 1, but 2 former Kiffin assistant coaches. People forget that Gus Bradley got his NFL start as part of that Bucs crew as well. And all of those great defenses share one common through line. They kept it simple. They played the same coverages in the same situations in the same order for the most part, and everyone knew they were doing it. Cover 3 and Tampa-2 accomplish the same goals, they just do it in a different way, and therefore both of them are 2 sides of the same coin. It's the yin and yang of football. Cover 3 on 1st down, get a stop, then it's time for cover 2 on 2nd and 3rd down. Just draft a bunch of freak athletes that can pull that off and call that same sequence on every single series, and odds are you've probably got a legendary defense. By the way, one quick thing before we get out of here, this episode took a long time to make. It was about a year in the making, if I include all of the random events that even led to the opportunity to me getting 2003 Bucs film in the first place and mid-2000s Bears film. It's a crazy story, and I'll say that for another day. But I made some really good true friends along the way, and they know who they are. They're watching this probably. I'm also very lucky that I have a sponsor like Manscaped that was so patient and willing to wait for me to be able to do this one the right way, just because there's so many historical references and resources that I had to go through. And they were very patient with me for a lot of reasons. And I thank them for that as well. As you know, Manscaped was also sponsoring our draft coverage when I was out in Kansas City with our podcast, the Bootleg Football Podcast. And I had to leave Kansas City early to handle a pretty dire emergency back here in California. And so technically I didn't get to fulfill my obligations to them, and they were very cool about it. They totally understood. Again, we've been partnered for a long time. And so in my very transparent effort to make that up to them, because they were so gracious and so patient, if you happen to be in the need for any sort of grooming equipment, whether it's trimmers, like they just released a beard trimmer called the Beard Hedger. They have nose hair trimmers, they have colognes, they have lotions, they have shampoos, they have ball toner. Like literally it's an anti-chafing ball deodorant. I'm not fucking kidding, guys. They have ball toner. Really, whatever you need to take care of any part of your body. It's all really good, high quality stuff. I've partnered with Manscaped forever. That's why they were so willing to wait for me and be patient. And they've been such a good partner. So if you just happen to be in the need for anything to take care of any part of your body, the best way to support my show is to support my sponsors, because they support me and they let me make cool shit like this. So again, go through their catalog. That's all I'm asking. I'm not saying you have to buy anything. Just go through the catalog. And if you like anything and you want to try it out, promo code FilmRoom at the link in the description below at manscaped.com. That gives you 20% off plus free shipping. So again, just check it out. Use the promo code. Again, promo code FilmRoom, 20% off, free shipping. They were so flexible with me and so kind with everything that was going on. Call your parents and tell them you love them. And I'll see you guys soon.